I will try to monitor the Discord for questions. This is a great session to have questions in. I will do my best to make sure that I keep a look on that, but we'll catch up just as fast as we can. So really happy to be here with you guys today. We'll go ahead and jump right in. So I'm Chris Furtick, and I'm here to talk to you about ransomware, which is a bit of a bummer conversation to have on a Saturday morning. So I'm really happy to be here. Think about this, right? We're here on a Saturday morning. Most of us are based in the Greenville upstate area. The talks that you hear today are from folks who are impacting cybersecurity around the globe. How cool is that, right? Just think about that for a minute. And with the work that Adam Anderson's doing, we're going to the stratosphere, right? So I think Greenville is really important. I'm based here just down 85 going towards Clemson. I'm here to talk about ransomware, which is not always a fun topic, but we'll try to keep it upbeat. I've got a lot of good information to share with you. Stop me. Let's have a conversation. And at the end, you'll see some contact information. You can shoot me an email, reach me on LinkedIn. Sometimes I get on the Twitter sphere and we can talk there, but email or LinkedIn are the best spots. So as you can see from the slide deck here, we're going to talk about ransomware. These are tips that you can prepare for and avoid attacks. So I am an incident responder. So I meet folks in the middle of their darkest day oftentimes, right? Their entire environment has been locked down with ransomware. They're in the middle of a malware outbreak. It runs a gamut, but I will tell you the majority of the cases that I work over the past year have been about ransomware. This talk specifically is about a specific case that we worked just a couple months ago. So there'll be some facts that I'll share with you. What you won't hear is the name of the company. We won't talk about that. I've not been cleared to mention those things, but almost anything else is an open book. So I'll give you a lot of good details here and then we can kind of dig in. So we'll keep going. First off, I work for FORTALICE Solutions. We are proud to be a nationally certified women-owned small business. So my boss, Teresa Payton, was the first female CIO of the White House. She served under the Bush administration. So we're kind of known for our red teaming capabilities. Almost everyone in the company has a top secret government clearance. So we work both in private industry as well as government. Again, I work in digital forensic and incident response. So we'll talk about what that means in just a few moments. But I did want to give a shout out to my company that are sponsored this year. And I'm really proud to work at FORTALICE. Speaker introduction. Again, I'm Chris Furtick. I've got about 10 years of cybersecurity experience. I do some work for SANS as a security leadership subject matter expert. Also do some 1099 work for McGraw-Hill as a technical editor. The last book I worked on, you'll see there is the GPEN all-in-one guide. So lots of acronyms there. I won't read all those things to you. I'm really proud to have been a volunteer for the Greenville BSides over the past several years. So I'm really happy about where we're going with the locals scene. One thing that's the most important thing for you to remember from this slide, though, is that my cat, Smokey and the Bandit, think I'm really cool, man. They come and whenever they get hungry, they come here and we go snacking. It's amazing. So we'll keep going. First off, these are proactive steps you should take. We're going to look at this case from two different perspectives, right? The two perspectives are, one, this happened to a client of ours. The other part is, how do you prepare for and avoid so you don't fall into the same category that they do. So again, we're not going to talk about what the client name. We'll tell you what vertical they were in. We'll tell you the ransom that they did end up paying. We'll talk a little more about that and what the negotiation process looks like. But the most of the facts that we'll talk about here, and I know I see Shane Edwards smoking Smokey and the Bandit. I figured he'd like that one. I know he's got a couple of Bandit cars, but we'll talk about some other cases as well. So we'll keep working here, guys. Ransomware for the headline. So I don't have to tell you guys, you are here on a Saturday morning watching a security talk. You know about ransomware. You understand kind of the implications. You can't go to any of the websites on any day and not see a major breach happen within the past 24 hours. So you see JVC Kenwood got hit a couple days ago by Conti. The one thing that you see here on the right is a dark website. So we've seen a significant uptick in name and shame. And what that means is when an attacker exfils data, they go to their dark website and post that they've got you for ransom, how much data they have of yours, and they give you a countdown. What this does, it lets the entire world know that you're in the middle of a ransomware attack, right? It also creates pressure for you to pay that ransom. So that's why the name and shame sites come up. We've seen, I would say, and I don't know that statistic from the cases that we've worked, but I would say over the past 6 months, I can't think of one where they didn't go to their dark website and post data about what they've stolen from the client. So you see this one from Missouri Delta here. They threatened to and ultimately release 95,000 patient records, right? Imagine those 95,000 people having all of their data freely available on the internet now because Missouri Delta, A, didn't have the controls in place to begin with, and B, didn't pay the ransom. So yeah, so in the Discord, the Pearl Harbor of our times, I think you're exactly correct. And this is an epidemic. The reason that I believe we've seen such a rise in ransomware over the past probably 18 months or so is the rise of the ransomware syndicates, right? So we do ransomware as a service now. So I don't have to know how to break into a network and traverse the network and escalate privilege and create malware and create encryption software and negotiate payment and launder the money that way. I don't have to do all of those things. I just have to be able to do one of them and go find a buddy to do the rest, right? So we're seeing these syndicates form. You look at Conti, some of the others. It's really becoming an epidemic proportion. So the barrier to entry is much lower than it was just a couple of years ago. So that's the explosion that we've seen. Over the past 18 months, we've seen just a significant rise in that. And if you've not been watching the news, it's not hard to see those things if you're not paying attention. We'll keep going. Ransomware by the numbers. These are statistics from several different reports. The Coveware report, I think, is really good. Sophos is decent as well, but here are some things to keep in mind. So the average cost of dealing with a ransomware attack is $1.85 million. Ransom attacks that threaten leaks, 81%, right? So that's the vast majority. The third bullet point, I think, is really important because we're seeing a shift in some of the attacks, what we call extortion style attacks. Attackers are coming in, siphoning off your data, not bothering to encrypt the rest of the environment, but posting you up on the dark web and asking you for the ransom payment. They don't have to go through and deal with the decryption or anything else. They don't have to encrypt the environment and wait for that to happen before they're able to ask for the money. So we've seen a significant uptick in that. It's still not nearly as high as what we're seeing ransomware cases where they encrypt the entire environment, but this is becoming an issue. So keep that in mind when you hear extortion style attacks and you're hearing, oh, we've got all the best protection against encrypting all of the data, right? So some of the backup softwares and EDRs can stop those things from happening. If they can siphon off your data, do they really need to go through and encrypt all of your devices? We're seeing a significant rise there, so keep that in mind. The fourth bullet point that you see there is the average ransom payment. So that's $136,000. And I want to talk about that number a little bit. That number is a bit skewed. The study that this came out of for the Coveware blog was taken across the entire globe. Many of those respondents came from India. The average ransom that they're seeing in India is about $10,000 per incident. If you were to see that number just for US, the number would be considerably higher. So the average that we're seeing is anywhere between $450,000 and $750,000 ransom payment per attack. So keep that in mind. Downtime, we can talk about that as well and what that impact is to the business. But think about the bottom two bullet points. If you don't remember anything other than this from this talk, this is important. The top two vectors are email phish, which is 40%, and exposed remote access, 37%. Combined, that's 77% of attacks come from these two things that we've known have been relatively low-hanging fruit for quite some time, right? If we're doing better user awareness, if we're doing turning off macros so that they don't get through our email filters, if we're educating our users not to click on links, the email fish vector goes down considerably, right? And I know if you look at some of the tools for doing user awareness, like the Hook Security and some of the Nova forwards are doing some really great videos and helping with that. I think that's really important. The next portion that you'll see here, and one that I see a considerable amount of our cases, is exposed remote access, having RDP exposed on the internet. So we'll talk about that a little bit in a couple slides, but exposed remote access, if you've got RDP hanging out on the internet, we've got a problem, right? Sometimes that comes from shadow IT or other things, but we've got to clean those things up. So we'll keep going. A case overview. So the case that we'll talk about today, the victim organization was a North Carolina-based manufacturer. So they've got 20 sites across 10 states. Their original demand was 25 Bitcoin. They did pay the ransom and they negotiated that down to 12.5 Bitcoin. Last I checked, Bitcoin was around $50,000 or so dollars each. So that kind of you can give you an idea of what they paid. Their downtime was about 12 days, and the negotiation time was about 6 days. We'll talk about that in a minute. Some folks think that paying the ransom is an easy button, right? You ransom my stuff, I pay you the money, you give me the key, we keep going. That's not how it typically works. There are a lot of other intricacies built into that. The point in the Discord channel, you're absolutely correct. Cyber insurance is looking at RDP as part of that. There are, at some point, there's going to be, you got to be this tall to even get cyber insurance, right? We're seeing folks get turned away because they don't have basic controls put into place. That's a good point that you mentioned there. And the variant of ransomware here was Snatch. So if you look at the right side of the screen, this is an actual screenshot of the ransom note. Client had a backup job fail over a weekend. Admin logs in and sees this on several devices throughout the environment, and then it's game on at that point, right? So we're seeing most of these threat actors use Proton Mail or Tutanota for contact, and they're giving a website for you to go visit to log in to get the ransom started. So we'll keep moving here. Proactive tips. So think about the timing of attacks. When do we typically see these things happen? The larger attacks typically happen around US holidays. And it makes sense, right? There's less folks working at that time. There's more time to be able to do things because people are on vacation, and they make a bigger impact when you do it. If you see the pattern here, most of us, especially those of us in the Southeast, were impacted by the dark side attack on Colonial Pipeline, right? So Mike mentioned in his talk earlier, no gas at several gas stations, things like that. That happened around Mother's Day. The next one we saw was JBS Meat. So one of the largest meat processors in the world was impacted around Memorial Day of this year. We saw the KC attack happen around July 4th. That was huge from an MSSP perspective. And what I want you to think about is, who's next, right? We didn't see any large attacks happen around Labor Day, which was great. And being an incident responder, man, I rarely get a holiday off, right? So I had Labor Day off this year, which was really great. I was really happy for that. But what I'm concerned about is what happens next, right? Who's being set up for an attack on Thanksgiving? Typically, attackers are within an environment for weeks before they start their encryption process. They're getting more intelligence, they're elevating their privilege, they're going and destroying your backups, by the way, and we'll talk about that. But typically, they're in the environment for a few weeks before they perform an encryption. So what I want us to be able to do is go back into our environments and increase our security awareness training for our folks. Let's do an extra fish test. Let's send out some more mailers. Let's get them thinking more about clicking on links and things like that. This is a great month, right? So it's a great month because it's cybersecurity awareness month. So I've spoken to several clients this month, and we're doing some more training for other clients, not to scare people out of getting out of IR, as Christian mentions in the Discord field, but it is important for folks to understand what we're seeing outside now. So this is a good time for you to send out extra mailers, do extra fish tests, whatever it is that you do inside your environment, right? Again, I know Hook Security and KnowBe4, some of the others have a lot of campaigns going on now. It's really easy to go in and click, send those things out, and raise more awareness for security. So really important time of year, and I think it's nice. And GeekSeek mentions, some weekly quizzes. Prizes are great. People love prizes, right? Whether that's Amazon cards. I see a lot of folks doing Amazon cards or giving away some type of points. I've seen folks do aggregate points where someone gets an extra day off at the end of the month after those things. There's a lot of ways to build that trusting community around security, but security is everyone's job, right? So we want to make sure that we empower the users. So that's really important. We'll keep moving. Cyber insurance coverage. You'll hear cyber insurance coverage. I don't think you can go to a conference without talking about cyber insurance now. So there's lots of sessions about it and a lot of online things to think about. What I don't think a lot of clients think about beforehand is what their coverage pays for. So this particular client had an issue. They had cyber insurance. They thought they were good until they read and found out what it actually pays for. So their insurance would pay for a $500,000 ransom. That's a problem, right? We already talked about Bitcoins were over $50,000 and they had 12.5 to pay. So that's one gap they had to pay out of. Also, their coverage did not pay for data recovery. It didn't pay for the negotiation. It didn't pay for anything else. It only paid for that ransom. So yes, they had insurance coverage and they thought they were in a good spot. However, they just didn't realize what they didn't know. So what we're encouraging folks to do is to know what your coverage is. You don't want to be negotiating with the fire department when your house is on fire, right? You want to know these things before time. And that's what's really important, to know what you're paying for, to know what to expect. Again, cyber insurance is important and it's great to have, but if you don't know what you're paying for and you don't know what's going to be covered, it's going to be very challenging for you to come out on the other end in a good spot. So proactive tip, go look at your cyber insurance policy, see what you're paying for, see what the brokers are charging for you, and make sure that you're at an appropriate level for your risk appetite. Perimeter exposure. So we talked about RDP being open on the internet. That's 37% of ransomware cases. This is huge. So Colonial Pipeline, you guys have all heard about it. The reason that started was from legacy infrastructure on the network perimeter. Someone left a VPN concentrator without multi-factor authentication turned on the outside perimeter. They were able to breach the environment and come through. Game over at that point, right? So we need to make sure that we understand what is exposed on our perimeter. And it's really easy for something like this to happen, right? Maybe it's shadow IT, maybe it's end-of-life devices that no one thought about anymore. There's all kinds of things that could be hanging out there. We need to understand what it is. So what I'm encouraging folks to do is to have a regular cadence of proactive scans, and that can just be an Nmap scan, right? Maybe you're spinning up an Nmap server and scanning once a month, and it's important that we do it once a month or at some regular cadence to look at the deltas, right? It's one thing to go out and say, oh, let's just go and see, what's open today, and it's fine, right? Everything was fine in the beginning of October. We don't have to do this again. No, what we need to do is make sure that we understand what opens over that time, right? So there's all kinds of things that can happen inside an environment. And I know Shane is very familiar with large environments, and he's posting some stuff in the Discord there. But yeah, it happens all the time, right? It's really difficult for any one body to know everything, all the moving parts within a network. So if we're doing regular scheduled scans with a regular cadence, it lets us understand. So I looked at it on the beginning of September, and I looked at it again on October. What changed, right? Why is 3389 open now? Why is SMB open now, right? So, and Icon recommends using Rumble for external scan. It's a great suggestion there. Icon, thanks for posting it. But let's make sure that we're watching our external exposure, right? The only way we're going to get better at this is if we understand our risk and our exposure. So we'll keep moving here. Multi-factor, all the things. This is a huge pet peeve of mine. Real-time authentication and biometrics should be integrated to all of the things. Passwords are dead. They are archaic. We should get rid of them. I don't care what you have to do. You got to be this tall to get on the ride. But if you're not doing multi-factor, some type of real-time authentication, you're not doing it right. If you're not road mapping a future where folks don't have to remember 12 or 25 character passwords and they can actually work through something that's biometric, maybe it's a push, something else, then we're not doing it right. So you've got to keep doing those type of things, because it's important. Multi-factor wasn't enabled in this client environment. They were rolling it out, but didn't have it fully operationalized when this attack happened. You can imagine how much quicker the rollout happened once they became encrypted with ransomware. So I think this is hugely important. We cannot continue to expect our users to come up with new 12-character passwords every 30 days, right? Based on whatever cycle that we're using. We can't continue to expect our coders to not hard code passwords into their scripts, right? We cannot continue to do that. So there are plenty of tools out that allow you to get around that, right? You can use CyberArk as a secrets tool. You can do all kinds of different things, right? Okta's got their multi-factor, but we need to be envisioning a passwordless future. I say everything that has administrative privilege right now should have multi-factor on it today, right? That's a thing for you to do in the next quarter. Make sure anything that's administrative has multi-factor turned on. So you're going to administer an Azure blob, you got to have multi-factor. You're going in to add new folks in O365, you got to have multi-factor. Heck, I think every email account in O365 should have multi-factor. So I can preach about passwords all day long, but passwords are dead. Let's bury them and move on. Backup and restoration. This is critical, right? So they always say amateurs back up and professionals restore. If you don't have a restoration process built into your backup program, then you're only doing half your job. And I would say even less than that. So this is a critical aspect. Folks either are using versioning software, maybe it's Zerto, maybe it's some of the others where you can roll back to 3 days before, right? But what about the account that the Zerto is using, right? Has that password ever been changed? Is it integrated with Active Directory? If so, then I've got access to your backups at that point, right? If I'm an attacker, I can go in and destroy them. So most of the attacks that we're seeing now, backups are being encrypted from the jump. They're coming into your environment before you even know, and they're encrypting all of your backups. And that's the case with this client. They used Veeam as their backup tool. The Veeam backup account was compromised. They went through and encrypted all the backup before they were even noticed, before we even knew they were in the hen house. They had already encrypted all of the backups. So we're seeing that more and more. I would say over 50% of the cases that we're working now, they're going after the backups first. So one thing that we can do, we tell folks, is to consider air gapping our backups. It means they're someplace off the network, right? Maybe it's a tape room somewhere. Maybe it's, heck, I don't know, maybe it's Synology that you plug in when you do a backup and unplug it, right? Take it back off the network. I don't care where it is, but if it's got 445 connected to it, SMB, then it's game over, right? These folks are going to get there and they're going to encrypt your backup. So let's get them off the network. Let's protect them so that if we do have to rebuild, we can do that from a good start. So the next point that you see there on proactive tip is restoration procedure should be timed and tweaked. What does that mean, right? What is your risk tolerance? How long can you be down to restore from a backup? What impedes you from being quicker at that, right? If you're not going through and taking a backup and restoring it and timing, how long does this take? How critical is this to my business? Then what are you doing, right? Yes, you have a backup and yes, you can come back from it. But if you're down for 2 weeks, are you out of business at that point? A lot of small, medium businesses would be. So we've got to get quicker at that. We've got to remove any barriers moving into that. So one thing to think about from a different client, they had an air gap backup. Great. It was on tapes. Perfect. How long did it take to come back? A 4 terabyte server to come back from tape took 72 hours. That's 72 hours that they weren't able to rebuild, right? All file servers were coming back on that 4 terabytes. So keep these rebuild things in mind and make sure that we're communicating up to our leadership. Hey, if we had a problem, it's going to take us this long to come back. You want me to shorten that? No problem, Mr. Leader. We're going to have some more budget. We're going to have to do some additional things. Cool. And you guys have some really good points in the chat there. That's really great. Understanding the ransom process. This is another important slide. Paying the ransom is not an easy button. Keep that in mind. We at FORTALICE have, we make the stands that we do not suggest that anyone pay the ransom ever. We don't believe it behooves you to pay the ransom. It funnels money into other criminal activities. There's a lot of other things that happen when you pay that ransom. However, at some point it becomes a business decision, and we understand that. You have to understand that either this client pays a ransom in several $100,000, or they completely go out of business. It becomes a different conversation at that point, right? So when a client decides they want to pay the ransom, we give them the pros and cons, what that means. If they decide to pay the ransom, what we do is act as a go-between between them and the ransom negotiators, right? So we're partners with Kivu. We work really closely with them, some of the other ransom negotiators as well. What that looks like is we actually kind of insulate the client at that point, right? So client knows what we're doing, and we're not charging extra money on top of this, but we're insulating them and advising them on how to move forward. So it's important to understand the ransom process. It's not like you're going to go get a Bitcoin wallet down at local Bank of America, put $100,000 in it and go buy a couple of Bitcoins, and you're going to be working tomorrow afternoon. That's not it at all. Negotiations often take several days. And you want to negotiate simply because it's typically 40 to 50% reduction in the ask if you do negotiating. So that's important. Oftentimes the attackers are not in the same time zone as we are. They're often on Eastern European time. So those negotiations can take several days back and forth. So keep that in mind. The time to recover is a good bit to come back and forth. So between the two. Often these decryption tools are awfully poorly written. So we've seen decryption tool come in, and if it's on a 10 megs of Word documents, it works fine. If you have to decrypt an entire virtual machine and it's 500 gigs, they very rarely decrypt those in any decent amount of time, and oftentimes they end up destroying the file, right? So first off, make backups before you try to decrypt, and try to decrypt the backups before you do that. That's the first thing. The next thing is sometimes you got to take that key and write your own better decryption tool. And the third thing is sometimes you've got to give extra resources to the V center to be able to decrypt the file. So we could talk about that. Hopefully you never get into that situation, but these are things to keep in mind. The next thing to know is attackers know your pain point. They are not going to target, for example, and asking for $10,000. $10,000 is nothing to target, right? They're also not going to a mom and pop shop and asking for $4 million. It just doesn't make sense. Typically what we're seeing, attackers are looking online. Sometimes they're looking in the data they stole from you. Sometimes they're looking at other online OSINT information, and they're taking about 10% of what your gross profit is for a year, and that's what they're asking for in ransom. So they understand about what you can pay, and they understand what makes it palatable for you. A new trend that we want to talk about is a lot of the ransomware attackers now have decided they're not going to work with a negotiator. They're putting in their ransom note, if you try to contact some of these negotiators, we will automatically delete your decryption key. So that's important, right? So they, for whatever reason, they decided they're not dealing with negotiators anymore. That's a middle person. They don't want to deal with them. We've seen a significant uptick in that over the past probably 3 or 4 weeks when threat actors are coming in and saying, we're not going to deal with negotiators anymore. So keep that in mind. And the last point that you see there, a lot of information on the slide, there is no guarantee. There's no guarantee if you pay that money that you'll get the decryption key. There is, however, what I like to call honor among thieves. So when you start dealing with a negotiator, you can start to see what the trends are, right? So if you deal with a negotiator like Kivu or some of the other ones, they will give you a report back saying, yes, we've dealt with Conti, for example, and our success rate is 92%, but we usually get the decryption tool in this amount of days, things like that. So you do get some type of assurance, but there is no guarantee that if you pay the ransom that you'll get your key. So keep that in mind. What I would say is, for a proactive tip here, is to consider opening a Bitcoin wallet now. Maybe that's someone in your financial services arm of your company. Have a Bitcoin wallet ready. Maybe you only put a few dollars in it, but have it be able to access it and be able to go add Bitcoin in case you need it. Again, we want you to be prepared if you were to come up on a ransomware situation. I love the chat, man. You guys are hitting on some really great points there. Network segmentation. So as we talk about segmentation, this particular client is, as mentioned, a manufacturer. Their network had grown organically over several years. They were based in about 10 different states. So that happened through mergers and acquisitions. Does any of that sound familiar? There's a lot of people who are growing through M&A, right? And you don't know what the other sites often have. And oftentimes you just open everything over the MPLS between the two different sites. And that makes it incredibly difficult to be able to contain an infection if we had it. So these attackers came in through the main data center. There was no segmentation between the main data center and the other 20 or so sites. And then they were able to move out over SMB 445 and encrypt the entire environment. So we want to have and be road mapping a zero trust micro-segmented network. And if you are doing anything in cybersecurity, you're hearing everyone talking about zero trust, right? It's the new buzzword. If machine learning and AI was a buzzword for the past 5 years, zero trust is a new buzzword. And what we're talking about when we say zero trust is a need to know specifically, right? Is there any reason for the iPad that's on the CEO's desk, should it ever touch the OT devices in a production manufacturing facility? Probably not, right? There's really no reason for us to have open networks across the entire environment. It makes it really difficult to protect, and it makes it incredibly difficult to contain. Oftentimes we go in the middle of an incident and talk to clients. They don't have any segmentation at all. So what we have them do is build up a clean network so we can put in triage devices or rebuilt devices and then build the network out from there with some segmentation built in. So the proactive tip: be road mapping a zero trust micro segmented network where only devices that need to talk to each other are allowed to do that. Let's keep moving here. Engaging law enforcement. This is a bit of a touchy subject for several reasons, but you don't have to, in the United States, you're not required currently to report a ransomware incident, whether you are in the middle of an incident, where you paid the ransom. You're not required to report those things currently. And I say currently because just a couple of days ago, there was some legislation that's beginning to form on the Hill where you'll have 48 hours after you pay a ransom to be able to come in and report up what you paid, what the particular specifics of your incident are. Now, having said that, we encourage folks to engage with the FBI and Department of Justice, and we can be their go-between for them. And there's two different ways you can do that. And I'll tell you the distinction between the two. One is you can do that anonymously. So we have relationships with the FBI and DOJ. We can broker the connectivity for you there. So if you want to do it anonymously, what we can do is give them information about your case, right? Maybe we tell them the vertical you're in, we tell them the variant that we're dealing with. What they can do is provide back some indicators of compromise and some threat intel that they have. So they have a world of information about IOCs. Oftentimes it's things that haven't been leaked out or others that don't know. So when we engage them on your behalf, it's really great for us to get that intel back. It's really awesome. Some of the things that we've read there, it's things that you don't see in normal reports. So I always encourage folks to do that. The second way to do this is actual transparency, right? So I can go to the FBI and say, hey, I've got a client. They're based in Greenville, South Carolina. Here's their name. Here's what we're dealing with. Here's how long they've been down, things like that. This gives them even more information. And I'll tell you why that's important. for the next person who gets encrypted, right? If they have the information from this new company, right, this new ransomware attack, they can add that to their database, and then we can build a better picture of what our threat actors are doing. So I always encourage folks to talk to FBI, and I've had some clients say, I don't want anybody knowing about this, right? And that typically comes from counsel, either internal or external, but they'll say, no, we don't want to engage FBI or DOJ, and that's fine. If they don't want to, it's okay. But we always encourage folks to do that just because it gives the FBI a better idea of how to deal with this for the next attack. One thing also to think about here, no matter where you're based, a different office may be handling the case, right? So Conti, for example, instead of having each FBI office having someone dealing with a Conti ransomware, all those are handled out of the Dallas office, right? Or maybe you're dealing with Snatch. So that may be based out of the Charlotte office or something else. So wherever you report into, maybe locally, you may get sent off to one of the other offices. So I appreciate the kind words in the chat there. This is good information. I hope you guys are getting something out of it. So the proactive tip here is consider what criteria should be weighed when engaging law enforcement, right? So think about, make sure your counsel understands the difference between doing it anonymously or transparency. If it's X number of data that has left the environment, is that when we call in the FBI? Is it X number of ransom? If it's over 5 Bitcoin, we engage. Those are things to think about. And what we're trying to do here is be proactive, right? We're trying to understand and think through these things before we're in the middle of an attack. Once you get into the middle of an attack, all these things start speeding up and moving more quickly. If we have a plan, it's really much easier to work through and to execute on the plan. We don't have to think through the things at that point. We just execute. That's what we're trying to get to. We'll keep going. Out-of-band communications. This one's big. It's another takeaway. Take a screenshot. Go to your leadership tomorrow. I don't know what you have to do, but folks don't think about having out-of-band communication. What happens when our collaboration and our email tools are compromised, or we think they may be compromised? This attack originally started as a business email compromise. We had indication that they were still inside the email system. So we had to quickly establish out-of-band communications, right? So it looks like maybe it's Proton Mail, maybe it's Gmail. I don't know what it is, but make sure you have a plan for out-of-band communications. We have to have a way to work through the incident and to share information back and forth in a secure manner. There are many times where we have to, if the entire environment's encrypted, how are we going to use SharePoint, right? How are we going to use some of these other tools? A lot of folks aren't thinking about what happens if the entire environment is down or we have an issue. It's just a really big problem that I don't think a lot of folks are thinking through. How do they talk if they're in the middle of a compromise? So the pro tip is establish out-of-band communication and collaboration strategy. Maybe that looks like you going and registering 5 Proton Mail accounts on Monday, and you keep the password in the password manager. And if the world's on fire, you've got 5 accounts you can dole out to different folks, and you all can collaborate on Proton Mail, right? So these are things to keep in mind. We're getting to the end, guys, and I'm really happy you guys are staying with me. So we're getting pretty close here. So we talked a little bit about name and shame. Again, most of the attacks that we're dealing with now are threatening to release stolen data on the dark web. It's rare for us to see a case that it doesn't happen anymore. Attackers, they're going to release data, right? So and the reason they do that is to compel you to pay. And what is a compelling reason now? Typically, it's reputational damage. So maybe you had good backups, right? Maybe you could bring them back up and you don't necessarily care about it. But what happens if all your contracts are leaked on the internet, right? What happens if all of your clients' data is leaked out on the dark web? These are some of the challenges that we're having to deal with, and we have to decide. Yes, I could bring my environment back up with backups, but is it worth paying 4 Bitcoin so that all of my clients' data doesn't get sprayed out there? These are things that we have to work out and you have to work through in real time, right? So you have to be prepared for that, have a strategy. Again, we're trying to do proactive things so we can just execute in the middle of an attack. The bottom bullet point that you see there, we are seeing attackers contacting leadership. So they're looking through LinkedIn or they're looking through org trees that they've stolen from your environment. They're finding out who the COO is, who the CEO is, who the financial folks are, who the legal team are, and they're contacting them saying that they have the data is out for sale on the dark web and your IT team is considering not paying, right? So they're contacting leadership. So you've got to make sure that you're telling your leadership that, yes, you may be contacted. Here are the things to say or not say. Yes, Mr. CEO, I understand it's going to be scary if you have a thick Russian accent person on the other end of the line saying that they have all of your data. That actually happened. I talked to a client on Wednesday. Their COO was called by a thick Russian accent. We've got all your data. You guys have to pay the ransom. So that will spook any CEO, right? So let's make sure we're communicating with them. You don't want that to hit them in a blind spot, and then they end up leaking some information that could be critical to the incident response. So the proactive tip that you see here, an advanced data map. These are basic things, right? We have to have a data classification methodology. We have to have those things because how do we know what value the data they took is? If I can go through logs and see that someone was in the environment for 3 weeks and they took out 2 gigs of data, but they only got access to public PowerPoint slides, am I going to be compelled to pay at that point? Probably not. But if we don't have a data map and we don't have a data classification methodology, it's really difficult to be able to do that. So it's really a challenge. I think we need to have data maps. I don't think we talk about that enough. It's not sexy like response or pen testing or anything like that. But having a data map, understanding where our data is really critical. All right. Oh, that's it. So I came in at 10:45. I'm getting us close to being back on track. What proactive tips did you hear that you disagree with? This is where you guys throw tomatoes, have some questions. Is there any topics that need more context to be actionable? And as Ryan posted, we'll have an attorney on later to talk about data maps. I think that's critical. Are there any proactive tips that you guys heard that you think you want to call Bravo Sierra on? Anything that's different than the way that I described it? Or any other questions that you have? I'm glad to answer those in just a couple minutes that we have left. Yeah, 100% right there. Critical in an incident to have a data map. So Shane said I could be a little more excited about the topic. I get worked up, man. I get excited about these things. So it's not good to be excited about it, but I want to give you guys good information. So I'm glad you guys are receptive. I will stop sharing and send the host back to Mike. And then I'll be in the chat if you guys have other questions. I'm glad to chat. So if you want to reach out to me, would love to have a conversation. You see my email address there, the LinkedIn. If you send me a LinkedIn invitation, please tell me that you saw B-Sides Talk or something. I don't typically accept all those things. And I rarely get on the Twitter scape, but my Twitter handle's there if you want to connect, man. I would love to chat. So I'll pass it back to you, Mike. Yeah, same cell phone I've always had, Shane.
Just doesn't like to text back, apparently.
Well, that's another thing, Mike. Yeah, sorry about that.
Got me blacklisted, apparently. So thanks, Chris.
Sure.
I thought it was a great talk. I actually posted a question. What's the longest dwell time you've come across in your adventures and incident response?
So longest time that I've seen, and logs only went back for 12 months, and they were there for every log that they had. So yeah, it's a challenge for sure.